I did a case study of First Presbyterian Church, Birmingham, Michigan, outside of Detroit. Very affluent, upwardly mobile community. All the kids are thinking Ivy League, stuff like that. And they were bragging about how little sleep they got, how much Starbucks they were drinking, and how active they were. And I mean, this is, part of the adult culture. Is we're doing all these things and we're achievement oriented and stuff like that. But I was thinking, wow, this is really messing you up, and you're not even fully aware of it. It's affecting your learning. So having enough sleep really matters for learning. Teenagers are chronically sleep deprived.
Question.
Yes?
Is napping a learn?
Napping helps a lot. A nap of 5 to 15 minutes during the middle part of the day really helps the brain. Yeah. Those Mediterranean, Southern European countries, and Mexico, places like that, they do have something there. Not only is it hot, but it actually helps replenish the brain. Partly it's about serotonin and stuff. I actually do that. Most days when I'm teaching during the academic year, where I take a short afternoon nap of 15, 20 minutes if I can, and then I'm ready to go till 9 or 10 o'clock. But without that, I really start dragging. Downtime, in other words. So Siegel also talks about, now is there a disjunction between these two different processes in the brain, the emotional center, which changes in adolescence, and also the executive function, which is not fully developed. But these other things, and they're actually related to those. One, adolescent brains are novelty seeking, way more than at any other time in life, in the life cycle. There's also increased social activity. The social parts of the brain just light up in adolescence. We're hardwired for that. And emotional intensity and creative exploration. And first time I saw this, I thought about confirmation. I thought, well, no wonder confirmation is there. Because let's take creative exploration. That's divergent thinking. Thinking outside the box. What is confirmation? Convergent thinking. There are right answers that we want you to get. And I'm not saying that I'm against the right answers. I mean, I'm a Calvinist, so I got a lot of right answers. I'm happy to share those. But we have to take into account how is the learner going to encounter some of that knowledge that we want to pass on. They have to encounter it and do something creative with it. Also, my colleague Ken Dean has made the point in a lot of different ways that why, when we're in a crisis in mainline Protestantism, do we ignore youth when they're at the peak of human potential for new thinking and creative thought? We shouldn't just bore them to death by teaching at them in a way that's focused on convergent thinking to the right answers, and all they're doing is hearing it and sitting. And that's why there is no perfect curriculum, and curriculum is only one little piece of the problem. How they encounter the subject matter is the bigger piece of the problem. Okay, I think, so what does all this mean for confirmation? We're not thinking together, because we can as human beings. What does any of what I've been lifting up, the tip of the iceberg here on neuroscience and learning, what implications might it have for how we approach confirmation with 12-year-olds?
I was thinking, instead of trying to give something to them, be open to receiving something from them, and dictate the teaching based on what you're receiving from them, instead of going into the mindset of it, from something else from them.
Correct, I think. I agree with you. We have to receive something from them. They have to be part of the process, actively. We have to beat John Locke out of our own heads. That learners are blank slates. Confirmands are not blank. They already have a wealth of experience, and they know stuff. They may not know the stuff we want them to know yet, but the only way they can know what we want them to know is by honoring what they do know and putting that into play in dynamic ways with the new stuff. John Dewey wrote a book called Experience in Education to counter his fans who thought he was saying you just throw out curriculum and you interrogate people's experiences because they have all these rich experiences and stuff and you self and reflect on that. He said, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you can teach mathematics and you can teach history and culture, all the inheritance of culture, fixed ideas, but that has to be done in a way that's not deadly. It has to connect with the interests, the agency, and the learning capacities of learners. They have to dynamically interact with it. But part of it is that they can bring something to the table.
Just had a little aha moment. I took a class on Eastern religions in college, and I took a class on Hinduism in seminary. And after both of these semesters, I couldn't articulate anything from the class because it was so foreign in how it is. I had no way to relate to it. When I studied a book in order to teach it to people, had a completely different body on it, completely different relationship with the information, and all of a sudden, for the person in their life, it's so I appreciate this idea of if we're presenting rather new concepts potentially to the kids, to initially start with what might they have experienced on a daily life. I know I think about 13-year-olds that might be a doorway into this information.
Yeah, and one of the things that you said, I think really is key. Several things, but one that really stands out to me is when you had to do something with that knowledge, you really learned it. This is the way when you teach, you learn it. Right? Why not have learners do something with it? Let's see, where is it? Yeah. A lot of times confirmation is informed lecture. Here's a map of most of the families and methods of instruction that are out there. If you look, this lecture is direct instruction, and it's right here. Okay? There's all this other stuff that can be done, and most of which involves active or collaborative learning. And one of my favorite approaches is, and I'm coming back to your point in a way, is the Jigsaw Method. Why not have them teach? The Jigsaw Method has two phases. First, you have people work in groups to master or get hold of some subject matter. And they work collaboratively on that, like I say, a group of 6, and then there's another group of 6 over here. And then at a certain point, you stop, and then you reshuffle the groups. So that, let's say you had 6 groups of 6, so all the ones were together, the 2s, whatever. Now, in these new groups, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And number 1 has to teach what they were learning in another group. Number 2 has to teach what their group. They teach each other. That is a way to actively use what you're doing. You have to learn it well enough to teach it. But when you do that, when you articulate it and have to explain it to somebody else, you really learn it. That is a great thing. And you don't suffer any loss of content, especially when you set it up as the teacher in a way that helps them to, talk about, let's say, Chalcedonian Christology. Who is Jesus? You can take different pieces of that and you coach them and put resources in their hands, but they being responsible for teaching it in phase 2 means that they really learn it because they are motivated, because they don't look bad and stupid. But also, in phase 2, they put it into practice. They really learn it when they use that. So that's just one little commercial for one kind of creative method of pedagogy. But, here's a whole page full of things you can do. Simulations, case studies, endless possibilities. Somebody was asking, I said I'd come back to this, I'm just going to do it passing. According to Daniel Siegel, the mind is the mediation between the biological processes of the brain and the social processes of relationships. It's the mediating energy and information control structure. It's not reducible either to relationships or to the brain. So both Piaget and Vygotsky are partly wrong. I think he's right about this, that the mind is the mid kind of mediation function. But where is this? Okay. Anyway, so doing something actively with it and mixing things up. Oh, I know what I was going to get to is the arts. Most brain research ends up at some point or other talking about how important the arts are for effective learning. Because you use lots of different parts of the brain, It uses executive control, you're actively engaged in it, and you're doing something creative with it. And there's endless possibilities for using film, you have to go to art museums where you can download stuff and have people say, what do you see there? You can do the whole life of Jesus and stuff. There's all kinds of things you can do with the arts. Somebody else, was it you? Yeah.
I was just thinking, what would we like if we had confirmation class at 10:30 on Friday night
Right.
Well,
instead of 10 o'clock on Sunday morning?
What would be the advantage?
Well, our babysitter left her Facebook page open one night, or the chat box, and she was talking to a friend and said, let's go out at 10:30. And her friend said, well, how do you know they'll be back? He said, well, these people I'm babysitting are really old looking by 10 o'clock. And they were right, and my kids are ready at 10 o'clock at night on the weekends, they're ready to roll, whereas when we try to jam it in between the 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock service on Sunday morning, we have to pry them out of bed.
Yeah. And they're not being lazy. There's actually scientific research that says teenagers' circadian rhythms change
yeah.
so that they need more sleep, but they also get up later, and they can't help it. And there's actually a raging debate in New Jersey now, and I suspect other places, about what time should high school begin. They're trying to push it back so that it starts later because of this very fact. And they also stay up later. And this is a biological thing, it's not just a cultural thing. Okay, here's another thought that is both taking into account learner differences, but also in the digital age, we all have information that's personalized to me and my interests. Instead of thinking about IEPs or individualized educational plans for special needs learners, what if we took that approach for all learners? You assess what do learners already know about the subject matter that we're talking about, and then figure out a plan with them where they help to shape it for where they're going to end up after the end of this process. Now that doesn't mean that you just do tutorial, although you might want to do some of that, but you would do that and some group stuff. Also, letting people work at different paces. This First Presbyterian Church Birmingham is doing the flipped classroom approach where the pastor records videos that then they get the content whenever they want within a certain chronological window. They don't all show up at 8 o'clock on Sunday morning synchronously. They get the content asynchronously. And then they come together periodically to talk about what are the implications of that knowledge, applying it. Okay. Let's see, I saw somebody else, maybe one or two more. Yeah.
Would you like is a very typical pattern of a larger teaching and a smaller discussion? It just strikes me that based on that whole prior knowledge, maybe we have that backwards, that there is a smaller discussion and then a larger discussion.
Yeah, have some guided small group discussion where people kind of get going on something, and then they have ears to hear maybe the new stuff. If you just start out cold and throw stuff at people, it's probably just going to go on one ear and out the other. But we know this happens if you just look at the results. But that's what I think you're right, maybe flip that.
One of the other implications that this affirms is why camp is so influential at these ages because of the learning styles. And it's interesting how when you do research across all the denominations, boomers, whatever age group, people who have positive experiences at camp tend to attribute their formation and or conversion to that time, even when there might not have been a lot of curriculum going on. But now that I've seen how this...
Yeah, so their bodies are involved, they're involved socially, they're creative, they're...
Right, and there's nighttime activity going on that sometimes synthesizes what was going on during the day.
Yeah.
And then they sleep.
When you use this stuff about learning and analyzing camp experiences, it's like, wow, no, you're right. Last comment, and then I'm going to close with a statement from William James.
This may sound a little out there, but I read a book recently called Fields of Compassion, where it talked about the brain in new research as possibly a radio, rather than a computer or hard drive, in that we actually receive information that is just kind of like information waves around us. And I was wondering if there's any accuracy to that, or if it's just completely
It's half accurate.
Half accurate.
Because the radio is passive. It receives, but it doesn't do anything with it. It does have a little translation thing, but the other half that's missing from that is where I started, that the mind is an active process that has to do stuff, and it's always doing stuff, way more than a radio. But half of it is correct, I would say. Let me close with a quote from William James. I usually quote John Dewey, but William James, I was reading this summer, talks to teachers on pedagogy, or on psychology rather. And this is a little bit of a long quote, but I think it's really important. What do we take away from learning about how the brain functions and so on? Whenever you see psychology, you can also put it in neuroscience. Psychology is a science, and teaching is an art. And sciences never generate arts directly out of themselves. In other words, you can't just go to the brain stuff and figure out what you need to do. An intermediary mind must make the application by using its originality. In other words, you have to have pedagogical imagination. A science only lays down laws within which the rules of art must fall, laws which the follower of the art must not transgress. But what particular thing he shall positively do within those lines is left exclusively to his own or our genius as teachers. And so everywhere the teaching must agree with the psychology, but need not necessarily be the only kind of teaching that would so agree. For many diverse methods of teaching may equally well agree with psychological laws. In other words, neuroscience gives us the necessary conditions, but it's not sufficient for doing the work of pedagogical imagination. To know psychology or neuroscience, therefore, is absolutely no guarantee that we should be good teachers. To advance to that result, we must have an additional endowment altogether. What else do you need? A happy tact and ingenuity to tell us what definite things to say and do when a pupil is before us. That ingenuity in meeting and pursuing the pupil, that tact for the concrete situation, though they are the alpha and the omega of the teacher's art, are things to which psychology or neuroscience cannot help us in the least. So this is minimum knowledge. This is just a base, and it gives you some framework, but there's still a lot to be done creatively. That, that teaching is a creative process, and that you can't get from neuroscience. Okay, 2 books that I highly recommend. There's hundreds of thousands of books, but this one, Brainstorm by Daniel Siegel, it's all about what goes on in the teenage brain. It's for teenagers, it's for parents, it's also for teachers. And then this one, How the Brain Learns by David Souza, is a richer treatment of what does neuroscience mean for learning that I've given you.